So tonight's lecture, I think I've done all those little bits of housekeeping. I should particularly welcome, though, our past lecturers. I see that both Bev Sherry and Andrew Montana are with us. Wonderful to see you both there. And anyone else, I don't think there are any others, but if so, you're most welcome, and we love to keep in touch. Board members, we have Maria Rizzo, who's helping out tonight, and of course Donna, and I think Leslie Salter might be there, and Patrick Gavigan, a former board member. Very pleased to have him with us too. Of course, the William Montgomery lecture was set up because of a certain chap, Mr. William Montgomery. It was added to the Glass Inc. annual calendar with the aim of drawing attention to Australia's rich heritage of glass in architecture as one way to bring new awareness and knowledge of glass to a wider audience, to encourage scholarship around it, and to recognise the need for its conservation in future. I should say into the future, because it is happening as we speak. It was deliberately named after William Montgomery, Melbourne's leading stained glass artist for 40 years, from 1887 until his death in 1927, while he was still working on two major commissions: the Great South Window at Melbourne University's Wilson Hall, more of which you will hear in the lecture itself tonight, and the new Warriors Chapel that was rising at All Saints Cathedral in Bathurst, in New South Wales. Montgomery arrived in Melbourne already a master of his art and craft. His 7-year apprenticeship in Newcastle upon Tyne culminated in the award of a National Arts Scholarship to attend the South Kensington School of Art, now, of course, the Royal College in London. This led to 3 years at the leading ecclesiastical stained glass firm, at the time Clayton and Bell in London, before he headed to Munich, where he was employed by Franz Meyer and Company to teach the English style of glass painting to his Bavarian colleagues. In Australia, he was responsible for more than 2,000 installations, from small domestic works to entire cycles of stained glass for churches of all denominations. To give some idea of the diversity and scale of his work, a suite of 1880s windows at St Michael's Catholic Cathedral, Wagga Wagga, and St Augustine's Yass in New South Wales, grand entrances for many of marvellous Melbourne's mansions, domestic scale windows for Archbishop Daniel Mannix's private chapel at Raheen, a cycle of First World War memorials in the Chapel of All Saints Geelong Grammar School in Victoria, to name just a few. But William Montgomery contributed to the art and cultural life of Melbourne as a founding member of the Victorian Artists Society and a long-term councillor and president during the difficult years of the First World War. He then became a trustee of the National Gallery of Victoria for the last 10 years of his life. And it is on the anniversary of his birth date in 1850 that Glass Inc. offers this lecture each year. This year it is the day before his birthday, as a small tribute to his significant contributions to Australia's cultural heritage. Now, it's just a little bit of background on Montgomery and why we think he is an appropriate person to be named for this event. Tonight's lecturer is Dr Susan Kellett, who was a registered nurse of decades standing before she completed her PhD in 2016. She holds a Bachelor of Nursing in Honours and a Graduate Diploma of Nursing Perioperative, and has spent 4 years as a nurse in the Australian Army, but has always worked in the repatriation sector and is now Senior Manager Wellbeing, looking after veterans at the RSL Queensland. Her thesis was Australia's Marshall Madonna, the Army Nurses Commemoration in Stained Glass Windows, 1919 to 1951. And I just want to make one little comment myself before handing over to Susan. I was contacted by her, having just completed the exhibition at the Shrine of Remembrance, and Susan very enterprisingly, and she's like a dog with a bone when it comes to these things, tracked me down through the shrine and said she wanted to do this thesis. And I thought to myself, didn't say it to her, thank goodness, but I thought to myself, she'll never find enough windows, never. I thought, 16 to 20. Well, you proved me wrong very, very neatly, Susan. How many did you find in the end?
They're not all war memorial windows, but I found about 120 windows across Australia that are dedicated to or show nurses.
Yeah, well, I think that was a great piece of research that you undertook, and certainly very worthwhile. And it does form the basis for tonight's William Montgomery lecture, 2024, Walla and the War Memorial. So it's over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Bronwyn and team. I'm honoured and delighted to be able to present the William Montgomery lecture for 2024. And I'm also very excited to be able to present you some of my research, which continues to focus on Napier Walla and the windows of the Australian War Memorial. So we'll get straight into it, I think. So the Australian War Memorial in Canberra was conceived by war correspondent Charles Bean during World War I, and its Hall of Memory constitutes Australia's premier shrine of remembrance to the nation's fallen. In founding the institution, Bean was joined by fellow war correspondent Henry Gullett and returned man John Treloar. Bean also went on to write Australia's massive history of World War I. He was greatly affected by what he had seen and believed that the memorial and its collection needed to convey the plain, simple truth of war in order to serve as a fitting memorial to those that had died. He hated modernism, or freak art as he called it, or any method that tampered with the established norms related to art. Consequently, Bean exerted significant and sometimes stifling control over the memorial's artists to ensure that his vision of the collection remained unsullied. In the late 1920s, and with plans for the War Memorial well underway, director John Treloar began considering stained glass as an essential element of the Hall of Memory. Almost a decade later, in December 1937, and with the building under construction, Melbourne artist Mervyn Napier Walla was commissioned to design and execute the stained glass and mosaics afterwards for the Hall of Memory. Napier Walla was born in 1883, and he grew up on the family farm in Penshurst, a small country town in Victoria's lush Western District. In 1913, and at the age of 19, he moved to Melbourne, where he enrolled in the National Gallery Arts School. Walla thrived under the tutelage of the Heidelberg School's Frederick McCubbin and gallery director Bernard Hall. Bernard Hall, who was a close friend of William Montgomery, remained an influential mentor and friend of Walla until the older man's death in 1935. Walla engaged wholeheartedly in student life at the gallery, He participated in the annual fancy dress balls, and you can see him here along with Montgomery's son Mont in the background. Waller won many of the art prizes offered during his time at the school, and he also won the heart of fellow student Christian Yandell. Prior to Waller's enlistment in the Australian Imperial Force, or AIF, in 1915, the two artists married. Waller served as a bombardier with the 11th Howitzer Battery on the Western Front. During the Battle of Bullecourt on 12th of May 1917, he was shot in the back, right shoulder and hand. Note the figure who, with his right arm draped over the gun carriage, watches the battle. Waller had a propensity, as we will find out, of locating himself within art that had significant meaning to him. By the time he was evacuated to the 22nd General Hospital 3 weeks later, the 22-year-old was in a bad way. Seriously ill, the doctors and nurses waged an ongoing battle to save his life. Waller underwent 4 operations that attempted to preserve his right arm, but during a life-threatening hemorrhage, surgeons were forced to amputate at the shoulder. Despite the loss of his dominant limb, Waller started teaching himself to draw again using his left hand. He returned home to Australia in January 1918, and Christian supported her husband with her illustrative work while he continued his rehabilitation. 8 months later, in August 1918, Waller launched the first exhibition of war-related art in Melbourne. He quickly became known as the Digger artist, and over the next 7 months, he extended his exhibition to Sydney, Hobart and Adelaide. Waller worked tirelessly, creating catalogues of watercolours, oils, pencil and charcoal works of his memories and experiences in France, and he received widespread critical and financial success, with many of his works entering state and national collections. That image is one of the promotional shots for his exhibition in 1919. At around this time, Waller realised the need to express his art on a much grander scale. He began focusing on mural work, and in his own words, "I naturally diverted to stained glass and mosaic media." Waller began executing murals for churches and public and commercial spaces around Melbourne, and together with Christian, gained experience in the stained glass studio of William Montgomery. Montgomery was designing a major commission for the University of Melbourne, the Stevens window, at the time of his death in mid-1927. Waller was entrusted by Montgomery's widow to complete the design of this major work, which sadly we lost to fire in 1952. In 1929, the Wallers undertook a 12-month tour of Europe. They consolidated and extended their knowledge of stained glass in England, Ireland and France, developed important relationships with merchants from whom they would source their glass and supplies on return to Australia, and visited important mosaic sites in Ravenna, Torcello and Rome. Within Europe's cathedrals, the Wallers observed figural windows in which space and subject matter were divided to form elements of a cohesive narrative. In an age typified by the oral tradition, such windows represented a visual aid to the message of Christianity. Waller was attracted to the philosophy and art of the arts and crafts movement. He greatly admired the writings of William Morris and the cartoons or life-size designs of windows of Edward Burne-Jones. However, he was critical of the latter's windows, which he felt were lifeless and flat and did not capture the true essence of glass painting. Instead, Waller was drawn to the work of the late Christopher Wall. Wall revolutionised glass painting in the late 1800s by introducing textual effects that more closely resembled the painterly techniques traditionally used by artists on canvas. In London, Napier and Christian accepted the invitation of Wall's daughter, Veronica, to work in her late father's studio. Now, I don't actually know if this is Veronica Wall's studio, but it is a studio, so I've popped that in there for context. Whilst he was there, Waller designed and painted his first 2 windows, and these were for All Saints Church of England in Canowindra, New South Wales. He painted St Luke and St John, and these were commissioned either just before or as he arrived in Europe. Upon their return to Australia in the early 1930s, or in 1930, the Wallers collaborated and worked closely on their respective commissions as they developed their glass painting proficiency. In late 1930, All Saints Canowindra contacted Napier to design a 3rd window, St Mary Magdalene. While some suggest that this is Christian's work, parish records reveal that Napier was commissioned to design this light, but the hand of both artists is evident in its execution and design. The 3 Canowindra windows reveal the evolution of Waller's technique and style over the period of a year. Simplification of both his subject matter and choice of colour are evident, as is progression towards the rectilinear composition for which he would become known. The heavy stippling and shading on the face of St Luke gradually paired back to the softer, more nuanced complexion of the Magdalene. Now, Waller used his 1931 study for Christian to guide his shading. And when you compare the work on the sketch with the window, it's clear that this work was referenced. By stylising her features, he produced a modern saint whose direct and sultry gaze contested the modest biblical women generally seen in glass. But while Waller consolidated, extended and developed his technique, one aspect of his work remained unchanged. He used his profile for the golden-haired St John. Over the next 5 years, Waller quickly extended his reputation as an architectural artist of note. Mosaics for the University of Western Australia and the first floor facade of Newspaper House in Collins Street, Melbourne, along with an important window for the Wesley Church in Lonsdale Street, proved his ability. Back at the Australian War Memorial, director John Treloar clearly perceived the Hall of Memory windows as part of the memorial's art collection, rather than a simple architectural embellishment. And this was substantiated by the engagement of an academy-educated artist, rather than a trade firm to create stained glass. And it didn't hurt that Waller, like Bean, Gullett and Treloar, was a returned man. Now, Waller would have known of the challenges that working with Bean might present prior to his accepting this commission. He was a socially and politically active artist in Melbourne's art community, and this included several of the official war artists from World War I. And his friend and mentor, Bernard Hall, had been, along with Gullett and Bean, a founding member of the memorial's art committee. However, Waller soon learnt that the director, Treloar, was not only sympathetic to and supportive of the artists whom he commissioned, but he also shared Waller's belief that the Hall of Memory needed to embody deep symbolic significance. A mutually warm friendship developed between the two men, and Waller took time to discuss and explain important details of his work with Treloar so that the director could influence, and in some cases override, Bean's opinions and decisions about the space. Unsurprisingly, Bean was adamant that the Hall of Memory must reflect realism. Plain, simple, realistic figures of, say, an infantryman and a light horseman to any symbolic detail that an artist might suggest. Bean also believed that the traditions of Christianity were unable to satisfactorily express the magnitude of loss that the nation had incurred. However, for Waller, Bean's plain simple truth was never going to suffice. And with Treloar's support, Waller began to quietly and deliberately align his subject matter in the very fashion that Bean opposed. Now, critical to Waller's concept for his symbolic scheme was the inclusion of a woman, a member of the Australian Army Nursing Service, and she was to form the central element of the south window. The nurse devotion proved to be the first hurdle that Waller needed to overcome, Bean initially rejected the inclusion of a woman. He perceived the windows as masculine in nature. However, Treloar supported the nurse's inclusion and felt that her omission opened the memorial to potential criticism. Together, he and Waller enlisted the support of Henry Gullett to overcome Bean's influence and include the nurse as the central element of not only the south window, but the entire scheme. Waller justified the nurse's inclusion in central location from an artistic perspective. He earlier expressed concerns to Treloar about a persisting dark mass in that part of the south window where I would decide that the point or centre of illumination should be. The nurse's scarlet cape added the much-needed splash of colour, which should be shuffled into the middle light of the south bay. However, Waller's 1939 study of the south window reveals very little of the red cape, so crucial to the artist's argument for the nurse's inclusion. Waller's compulsion to include her exceeded the simple aesthetic advantages that her uniform offered. As a man who had experienced not only war, but also the significant personal sacrifice it could demand, the plain, simple, realistic figures of, say, an infantryman and a light horseman that Bean demanded were never going to suffice. The story Waller was compelled to tell needed to be aligned with greater significance. And so, like his medieval forebears, Waller turned to the enduring tradition of Christianity. His subterfuge was so successful that it went unnoticed for 7 decades. From the moment he submitted his artist's brief in 1939, Waller described the cathedral-like atmosphere he planned to impart in the Hall of Memory. Waller drew further inspiration from the cruciform footprint of the Australian War Memorial and combined it with the ancestry of his art. So we can see the cruciform outline of the War Memorial there, and the red centre, the red line, is the location of the Hall of Memory, which is at the crossing, would have been the crossing in a traditional church. Lighting within the Hall of Memory proved to be a challenge, and Waller worked with the building's architect to modify 3 semicircular lights set high in the south, east and west walls of the War Memorial Hall of Memory into 3 large windows topped with a lunette or semicircular window. He designed 3 figurative windows that embodied 15 characteristics of the AIF and, like those he had observed in Europe, told a story. Waller created a visual account of Australia's experience in the war. The east and west windows relate directly to the eastern and western campaigns fought by the AIF. They contain relevant figures and architecture and are crowned by the symbol under which the AIF was united, a rising sun. And you can see that in the transom, the lunette above. The south window represents Australia. Beneath the Aurora Australis and a Southern Cross, all citizens who contributed to the war effort are shown. Man and woman as nurse, soldier and sailor, so the Air Force wasn't created until the 1930s, and officer and enlisted man. Now, the bird above devotion's head provides the key to deciphering Waller's religious symbolism. In mid-1950, and with the windows installed, the artist provided Treloar with a handwritten description of the scheme. In it, he defined the pelican feeding her young from her bleeding heart as the symbol for charity, and it continues to be described as such to this very day. Now, charity is, along with faith and hope, one of the 7 feminine virtues, and this provides a convenient attribute for the nurse. Visually, the bird surrendering its blood to feed her young symbolised a nurse willingly sacrificing her life for those in her care. However, charity only assumed the form of a pelican during the Renaissance. In medieval time, the bird was best known as a Christian symbol for Christ, with the pelican feeding its chicks her blood, serving as an allegory for his crucifixion. In the study for the south window, some technical problems. In the study of the south window, Waller strategically omitted the bird's halo, the definitive sign of Christ's holiness. Now, it is probable when he first designed the window in 1939 that he did not want to arouse suspicion with an overly religious device. Work on the windows stalled during World War II, but when it recommenced in 1947, the feminine relationship between the symbolism of charity and the army nurse was well established in Bean's mind, so that the addition of a nimbus to the bird in the Windows cartoon escaped notice or comment. In respect to imagery related to the crucifixion, the pelican in her piety is sometimes shown nesting upon the cross. Like her 14 male colleagues, the nurse stands upon a stone plinth with her back to a column. Those the men stand before generally suggest the streamlined muzzles, barrels, hilts and handles of armaments and arms, which, once past the symbolism immediately above each figure's head, taper up into the transoms above. Devotions does not. The nurse's column, while likewise rectilinear in form, maintains consistency in shape until after the nesting pelican in the lunette, and hers is the only light in which this occurs. Rather than the industrialised Art Deco impression of metal, Devotion's column contains a central core filled with eucalyptus leaves and gun nuts, and this insinuates the organic form of wood. Waller's subtle placement of lead lines suggests the crossbar of a Latin cross. With the pelican and her young nesting upon the Australian arms, atop an allegorical cross, Waller symbolised not only Christ's, but also our nation's redemption through self-sacrifice. Now, 2 years prior to Waller accepting the commission for the Hall of Memory, he executed this, the Pioneers window, for the Wesley Church, Lonsdale Street, Melbourne. High in the apex of its tracery, he depicted a pelican, charity. Barring the minor differences imposed by the spatial limitations of the quatrefoil and the artist's modernist approach, this is the same bird that ultimately found its home above Devotion over a decade later. While trade firms frequently adapted cartoons from window to window to save time and financially benefit their business, Waller did not. He was a professional artist and his windows were original works of art. Recycling the image of charity for the Hall of Memory transom was a regular. Through Hall, Waller would have been aware of the impending Australian War Memorial Commission when he executed this window, which celebrated the century of Methodism in Victoria in 1935, and there may have been a personal dimension to it. Waller declared himself a Methodist on his AIF enlistment. It is unlikely, though, that he was making a sectarian statement, and more probable that he was covertly establishing a direct association with Christian symbolism in the future Hall of Memory's windows. The pelican was referenced in his 1937 plans that never progressed past the conceptual stage, and like the medieval artist, Waller was reusing his subject matter. The west window signifies the resurrection. In the central light of its transom stands a lion astride a golden crown. Together they appear to allude to Australia's relationship with its imperial forebear. However, Waller described the quality of patriotism, of representing the urge and love of country, and he stressed love of this country. He made no mention of England. Now, in medieval times, it was believed that lion cubs were born dead and that their sire breathed life into them 3 days later. The medieval symbol for Christ's resurrection, the lion also features in the apex of Waller's Pioneers window in Melbourne, and like the pelican, was part of his 1937 proposal for the windows. Waller embodied the Ascension in the east window. In its central transom, an eagle alights on the column above the light horseman Audacity. Between the bird's wingspan, Waller placed 6 arrowheads ascending. Now, in medieval art, the eagle is symbolic of Christ's ascension. It is also the third and final element in the apex of the Pioneers window in Melbourne. Waller embodied crucifixion, pelican, resurrection, lion, and ascension, eagle. Waller created a symbolic and religious scheme of glass while accommodating Bean's mandate for realism. Now, if you visit the Australian War Memorial, the guide will invariably tell you that the men in the window are generic representations of Australian servicemen. They are not. As an artist, the use of a model formed a necessary part of Waller's work. The Anzacs depicted in this trade window portray a band of brothers. They are painted as generic figures in a stylised manner. The men appear flat and lifeless, and they do not reflect the arts and crafts aesthetic that Waller embraced. Observe now one of Waller's figures in the Hall of Memory Lights, Coolness. It reveals a level of proficiency in glass painting rarely seen in Australian stained glass. Compare the play of light and shade on Coolness's face to the men in the trade window. Waller used light in the true sense of the word to define the distinct anatomical planes and features of his model's face. The fact that Waller failed to identify the models he used for these windows was out of character and contributed to the persisting belief that the figures were generic representations rather than real people. And Waller did nothing to dispel this myth. So before we move on, let's just revisit the ongoing development of Waller's technique. So from 1930 and the window he created in the Wall Studio, St Luke, to a year later, St Mary Magdalene. This is a 1938 image of the Virgin Mary in a church in Norwood, and we'll be returned to it in a wee while, until 1949 when the first of the War Memorial windows is installed. So if Waller had gone ahead and installed the windows in 1939-40, I think we can agree that we would not have had windows of the calibre that we do today. Now, in the Middle Ages, founders of religious houses were often depicted in the stained glass windows of the buildings that they established. Waller used the men creating the hall, Bean, Gullett, Treloar and himself, as models for the figures of control, coolness, endurance and chivalry respectively, and he assigned the patronal identities of soldier saints to a few. The depiction of each man is not a literal representation of their younger selves. Waller imagined each as 3 decades younger and produced an idealised version of the older veteran as a youthful AIF soldier. Waller used the long face, thin lips and narrow nose of Charles Bean to create the youthful control, with the artist playfully acknowledging the older man's influence within the War Memorial. And in a nod to official war artist George Lambert's 1924 portrait of Bean, Waller also depicted coolness in a greatcoat. So we move on to coolness, and that is Sir Henry Gullett. While the younger coolness supports a fuller face than the politician and historian, his mouth, dark eyes, cheekbones and nose reveal Gullett. Associating him with coolness acknowledges Sir Henry's ability to influence and override Bean in decisions about the windows that frustrated Waller and Treloar. Endurance, with his upturned chin, offered Waller the opportunity to represent Treloar, who had endured both world wars and a goodly number of decades working with Bean, and returned to the War Memorial to continue his life's work. Treloar's blue eyes and fair hair, eyes, ears and chin are apparent. Endurance is also one of Treloar's soldier saints. He is shown shirtless and holding a fractured and bloody-tipped bayonet, which he appears to have withdrawn from the wound on his left thorax. More bayonets are shown upon his uniform, or speeding towards him from the sky. Endurance appears as a contemporary Saint Sebastian, the soldier saint and Christian martyr slain by arrows. Chivalry in the west window is Waller's self-portrait. The Cross of St George appears in the transom above. Waller aligned not only the theatre in which he saw action, so he's in the western window, which represents the western front, but also his subsequent sacrifice, the loss of his right arm, and artistic resurrection with that of a popular soldier saint, which is, of course, St George. Medieval texts upon which the accounts of St George's life are based report that he was brought back to life several times during his earthly existence before God finally granted him martyrdom. But not all of Waller's saints were servicemen. Standing at the base of a cross upon which her son died, there was no need to hide the halo of the Virgin Mary, the nurse's veil conveniently substituted as a nimbus. The snowy towel fanning from devotion's fingertips signified not only the hygiene practices actively undertaken by a nurse, but it's also a symbol of purity, which is associated with Christ's mother. Despite her intent to engage in clinical work, devotion lacks the apron commonly worn by members of the Australian Army Nursing Service when providing clinical care to their patients. And instead of a Australian Army Nursing Service grey, Waller dressed her to harmonise with the rest of the figures in his scheme. This facilitated the use of the colour employed in Western art for centuries to signify the identity of the Virgin Mary, blue. The sacrifice of mothers is an important aspect of commemoration, broadly lacking from remembrance practices that developed in Australia in the wake of World War I. Prior to the construction of Melbourne's Shrine of Remembrance, the RSL made overtures to have the sacrifice of the state's women recognised. However, this never eventuated, and by the late 1920s, and as the mothers of lost sons began to pass, their grief and commemorative agency likewise faded. This was progressively replaced with the growing and masculine-driven Anzac imperative. While some historians are critical of the maternal image of the nurse fostered on some Australian war memorials, devotion nevertheless signifies the considerable respect held for the profession at the time that these monuments were built. The nurse was a highly esteemed member of the public, and both society and members of the profession alike perceived nursing as good preparation for what was then regarded as the more important roles of marriage and motherhood. Now, in a post-feminist construct or context, such an admission will no doubt be seen as an anathema to contemporary thought. However, judging the politics of past society based on our existing principles of gender equality risks missing the societal significance of such acts. Waller's actions in allegorising the nurse as the Virgin Mary attributed to women a significant degree of respect. In the hierarchy of heaven, only Christ himself represented a greater symbol of sacrifice, and devotion, as both nurse and mother, effortlessly contested the primacy of the soldier saints in the Hall of Memory. It was Treloar who believed that a nurse should represent Australian women. In the Anzac Memorial in Hyde Park, Sydney, sculptor Rainer Hoft used a caryatid of mother, sister and wife to support the body of a dead serviceman. He shows the women of New South Wales supporting that state's sacrifice. Waller only needed a single figure, devotion. For many, negotiating the complex role of mother, sister or lover in the imaginings of a soldier patient was an integral part of a soldier's relationship with the nurse. For Australia's mothers, sisters and wives, sacrifice could endure well beyond the war. For many, like Christian Waller, the burden of loss manifested not in a death, but as the physically or medically or emotionally wounded man who returned home to her. Devotion was the reason Waller kept the identities of the models he used secret. While Waller, Bean, Treloar and Gullett were all returned men, they did fulfil Bean's mandate for accuracy. However, the woman who sat for devotion did not. She was too young to have served in World War I. She was not a nurse, nor was she an Australian. And at the time the windows were designed, executed and installed, she was Waller's lover. It was hardly the truth that Bean envisaged for the memorial's collection, or the image of the Australian Army Nursing Service that he desired shining from the south window into the sacred space of the Hall of Memory. Lorna Rayburn was the indulged daughter of a wealthy Auckland dentist. She completed finishing school in Paris before undertaking a semester at the Slade Art Gallery in London. She and Waller met in 1936 when, while holidaying in Melbourne, Lorna enrolled in Waller's mural painting class at the Melbourne Technical Art College, which is today RMIT. The Wallers separated the following year, but this appears to have been an amicable arrangement with neither party seeking divorce. Christian departed to New York in 1939 to pursue her increasingly spiritual beliefs, and while she was there, she sourced glass for her husband. After her return to Melbourne, they continued to share their Crown Road estate in the suburb of Ivanhoe, as well as the studio it contained. Christian's health deteriorated over subsequent years, making it impossible, in some instances, for her to complete her own stained glass commissions. Napier undertook work for her during these periods, and these responsibilities were one of the reasons why work on recommencing the windows stalled until 1947. Christian died in 1934, and Napier and Lorna waited a respectful 4.5 years before marrying. Now, much has been made about the separate spheres of influence contributing to the Wallers' separation. Christian's increasing spiritual beliefs and Napier's developing sophistication after the war. However, the collaborative nature of Christian and Napier's artistic partnership clearly continued following their estrangement and suggests that there is much more to this complex relationship than has been previously recognised. Waller had much to lose by leaving his wife for a younger lover in terms of his reputation, public standing and business interests, which, unsurprisingly for a stained glass artist, were intimately related to the church. In staying with Christian, whom he married in 1916, when consumed by the ideals of art, Waller honoured those ideals until the day she died. She used her art to support him when he returned home maimed after the war as a young man, and he repaid that debt when her health failed in her latter years. Now, Lorna replaced Christian as Waller's muse after they commenced their liaison in the late 1930s. He portrayed her as the Virgin Mary in an Anglican church hidden away in Norwood in suburban Adelaide in 1938. She was 26 at the time and could openly admit to being its model. When the Hall of Memory windows were completed in 1950, Lorna was 38 years old. Her affair with Waller had entered its second decade, and what likely started as a temporary dalliance for both had turned into a deep and enduring love. However, by this stage, Lorna must have held little hope of ever being able to formalise that love. Allowing the belief to persist into old age that she came to Waller's Crown Road estate in 1938 as a young bride rather than as a 46-year-old woman demonstrates how ingrained the need to conceal their liaison became in her life. Lorna gave up much to sustain her love. By the time they married, the opportunity to have a family of her own had passed, but the presence of neighbourhood children in their home suggests that the couple would have welcomed a family. Lorna happily sacrificed her artistic future for Napier, with her devotion to him allowing him to continue working right up to his death in 1972. While the Hall of Memory encompassed the sacrifice of Australians at war, Waller's portrayal of Lorna as the army nurse recognised sacrifice on another level. If Waller imbued his martial experiences in glass, then he also infused devotion with the personal reality he desired. His depiction in the nation's premier commemorative space to Australia's war dead allowed him to appear publicly and in perpetuity with one of the women who he loved and who had sacrificed so much for him in return. Analysis of the Hall of Memory reveals that a central tenet of Christianity, Christ's sacrifice, is embedded deeply within their stained glass windows, and this contests the belief that it was designed as a secular space. For Napier Waller, experience, ideology and art were indivisible, making the ultimate sacrifice to war, his ability to create, the ascendant narrative of Australians' commemorative practices, and those who tried to enforce them held little agency when the women who helped resurrect his life and career were to be denied a place in the nation's memory of war. Uncompromising in his beliefs, Waller accommodated his patrons' desire for those plain, simple, realistic figures of, say, an infantryman and a light horseman. But he also drew upon the principles of the arts and crafts movement to create a complex and symbolic narrative in glass. By allegorising religious sacrifice with personal and national loss, Waller contested the agency of the establishment and subverted its commemorative agenda. While Australian remembrance practices evolved to privilege the Australian warrior above all others, the artist used Christianity to assign deeply esoteric meaning to the experience of a nation and its people at war. In doing so, Waller corrected a major omission from the landscape of Australian commemoration when he located a woman of many identities, a martial Madonna, as the heart of sacrifice in the most sacred of Australia's commemorative spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we should all unmute for a minute and clap you. Very, very interesting, fascinating discussion. There are a lot of various bits coming up there. Now, I would invite people to either use the chat to write a question or to simply raise a hand, and we have got time, quite a lot of time, for questions for anyone who would like to ask one. If nobody's forthcoming, I would like to ask you about the naming of devotion. I don't think that was quite straightforward, was it?
No,
Susan.
When they finally, Dean finally agreed that a nurse might be shown in the windows, he wanted the nurse to be called Tenderness rather than Devotion. And there was another member in the artistic team, which time prevented me tonight from going into, but there was a sculptor, a Victorian sculptor by the name of Leslie Bowles, who worked with Waller very closely right up until his death, just after the windows went in from memory. But he pointed out to Bean that I think it was the motto of the French army was, oh gosh, now I've got to remember, devotion was the actual motto of the French army. And so for the masculine type of windows, it was certainly within reason to put it in the windows of the Australian War Memorial. So she might have been called Tenderness, and she might have been actually right on the side of the windows rather than in the middle if Bean had had his way.
Okay. I think there's sorry, someone got a question there?
Yes.
Yes, Beverly.
Yes, that was most interesting, Susan. Thank you very much. The iconography, your reading of those windows, and the detail, the photos and the details you showed were just fascinating. I think I might have read some of your work before. I'm still not convinced about the Madonna, about the Virgin Mary. They're the martial Madonna. She's she's devotion. Didn't you say at one point she represents Australian women too?
Yeah, both the nurse and Australian women.
Yeah, and the Pelican, of course, was so interesting, the way you made that relationship with the Wesley Church in Melbourne. It was interesting because the Methodists weren't in for very religious, holy pictures, but they had that, and you related it to the detail in the war memorial. So that's Christ, and all your reference to medieval symbolism was most interesting. I'm not sure about the lion though, but the pelican is well known. So that's Christ, but whether that leads to this female, this wonderful nurse figure as the Virgin, I just have to, think about that more. But it was very interesting, and I love what you had at the beginning, the Canandra window. I haven't been there for years, but I'd love to check that out. What else was I going to ask you? Oh, how you showed his skill as an artist. You had a window there from Heaton, Butler and Bain.
Yes.
And his work was so much superior to that. That was wonderful to see. And let's see what else. Control. What was he holding?
Control. I think Control might be holding binoculars. Hang on.
No, that was the airman, wasn't it? Chivalry.
Yep.
Chivalry's holding.
No, he's got binoculars as well.
That's coolness. But there was one called.
Oh, sorry, Control. My apologies.
Control.
He's holding down on the left-hand side is the top of a rifle, and he's not holding anything. He's got his.
I see.
I think he's holding a notebook.
He's got his fist closed strongly. Yes, I can see now.
Yeah, I think he's holding a notebook.
I see, yes. Look, all of it is, he was a great artist. And you brought that across so well. I think maybe, what else? I think that's about it, because other people will want to ask you questions. The design of those windows in Canberra, they're elongated, aren't they? So
yes.
He was restricted, really. I'm thinking about the work that he did, the New Guinea Martyrs window that he did for St. Peter's Eastern Hill in Melbourne. They're not elongated to the extent that these in the War Memorial are.
No, they're smaller lights.
Design of the windows themselves, but of course the faces are not elongated there. Beautiful. Thanks so much. Just great piece of work. I'm really glad it's recorded.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it deserves to be revisited, because you were making quite a few very big statements in there, and it was hard to actually hear all of what you were saying in some ways, because I've heard it before in our rehearsal, and I picked up much more the second time. So I think that's really good. We've got a couple of comments here from iPhone, who says, congratulations on a wonderful lecture. Thank you, Susan. That's not your helpmate over there, is it? Your technician saying that?
Not sure. Is that you? Yeah. No, he doesn't have an iPhone. No, he's got a Samsung. He's got a Samsung. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll believe you, Adrian. Okay. Yeah. Kerry says, fabulous lecture. Thank you. You've led me to other lines of inquiry, especially about the women in his life. So also heading back to Canberra for another deep look at these amazing windows. And actually, maybe the iPhone is Mark. Would that be right? I would like to invite you on the Veterans Public Arts Trail in Melbourne, where we discussed Christian and Napier, William Senior and Junior, and many more. And I would certainly recommend the Veterans Public Arts Trail as a wonderful, wonderful way to spend several hours. I can't believe how quickly 2.5 hours goes, walking around Melbourne's public art, which is all veterans, looking at all the work of veterans.
And as a veteran, I'd love that. So, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So Kerry asked a question in the chat about when the next public art trail is.
Can you tell us, Mark? Need to unmute yourself if you're...
Or just put it in the chat, or
Yes,
email it to Glass Inc. and we can let people know.
You did unmute there.
Hi, Bronwyn. Can you hear me? It's Mark here.
Yes, I can see you too, Mark. Yes. Great. When is the next one?
Bronwyn, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can.
So we don't have a set date yet for the next Arts Trail, other than during the Festival of Veterans Arts in March next year, unless there's some good demand where we'd love to put on one, especially if Susan is in Melbourne.
That could be arranged, I'm sure.
We can create one around her.
Well, thank you. We will certainly have information on the next FOVA, Festival of Veterans Arts, in March, going out through the Glass Inc. network. So thank you.
Richard from South Melbourne Recovery has a question or a comment.
Thank you, Dr. Kellett, for a fascinating and very informative lecture. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
A couple of questions. You mentioned that both the Wallers sourced glass from overseas.
Yes.
And I was wondering, was that true for this project as well? Was the glass all sourced overseas?
Yes, it was. There was Christian in 1939, when Christian went to New York, they were having difficulty because of the conditions from World War II, which had just started, with basically sourcing glass. And they started looking around. Waller, Trelaw writes to Waller and says, what about Tiffany? Well, of course, Tiffany is no longer in existence by then. But Waller did buy the glass from the Australian War Memorial from England. I've got the details of the company that he used. In fact, I've got the lists of the colours, the types of glass. It was a massive order. Yeah. And there were concerns that the ships on which it was brought would be torpedoed and lost at sea. It all arrived, and there was some disappointment when one of the shipments, a lot of the glass was broken, what hadn't been packed properly, and the company had to resend that glass. Right. Now, interestingly, at the time, Waller wanted to initially offload it in Sydney so the glass could be transferred to the Australian War Memorial, but at that point, from memory, Sydney wasn't an initial staging point. The ships went to Melbourne. However, with the number of returned men who worked on the wharves, when they found out the glass that was coming was for the Australian War Memorial, they made an exception and offered to offload it in Sydney. But he changed his mind and all the glass went to Melbourne instead.
And just from an artistic point of view, I find it fascinating, the realism of the portraiture and then the backgrounds of those wonderful abstract designs. It seems such a wonderful contrast and paradox in terms of artistic expression. And I think we're very blessed to have this one monument in Canberra. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Richard.
Any other questions out there? Left you all flabbergasted, has she? I would make one comment.
Paul's got his hand up, I think, Bronwyn.
Oh, Paul, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Paul.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm a bit fraudulent because I come up as Sharon by the looks of it.
Yes.
But that's not me.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was great. It was riveting. It was interesting. While I can understand the Waller was the artist with these windows.
Hmm.
Is there any record of who actually made them?
Yeah, so he painted them. So the glass was cut by Brooks Robinson, we believe. That's right, isn't it? Bronwyn?
Yes.
Yeah, and he painted and fired the glass himself, and then it was assembled by a lead, refers to him as a lead glazier, which we would assume would be from Brooks Robinson as well.
Do we know who that was, or is that given that he probably did the bulk of the work?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got a name. I've got thousands and thousands of documents, and I'd have to go through them, but I'm sure there's somewhere in them there is a name. Bronwyn and I were talking about this the other day, actually. So, yeah.
We'd all be very interested to know exactly who it was, yes. And I don't think that, I don't know how physically Napier would have leaded them. I know he did do an awful lot of the work himself, but to do that job, it's a huge, huge undertaking.
It was. And I'd like to make a comment here. So, Paul, I learnt lead light, the lead balloon. I think were you associated with lead balloon? You taught me.
Yes, Dexter was my partner. This is a bit embarrassing now.
That's right.
I'm not sure whether you learned with me or with Dexter. You would have.
Well,
do you recall who was teaching you?
I thought you were both there. But
yeah, they were busy.
I remember I designed a window. It had a golden fleur-de-lis in the middle of it. And I remember putting the last piece in and everybody standing around because nobody thought it would fit at the end. I remember you all telling me at the end. But, yeah, that kind of was your company, and you were part of my journey towards this thesis.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Are you still making stained glass?
Yeah, I am actually. I've got an old Queenslander and have done a goodly number of windows in it. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm happy to take all the credit.
Fair enough. Kerry is asking.
Thank you. That was great.
That's good. Kerry is asking whether your thesis is published. Susan,
I know. It's in the works. It will be. I think it's one of those things that when you work on it for so long. Then don't get me wrong. I must be unique, and I think I was the only PhD student in the history of UQ that didn't want their thesis to end. It was like living in a 24-hour documentary. It was just sensational. And I think doing this again, I do have to pull my finger out. I think enough time's passed now that it's new again, and I so enjoyed. I took the last week off work, and I have so enjoyed diving back in again. And it's amazing how your thought process crystallises further with a little bit of distance. And, I take on board, Beverly, your comment, and I suppose one of the things is about the Marshall Madonna, but if you read the thesis, when it gets published, you'll see how it all comes together.
Okay. Anyone else got a hand up that I'm missing? Maria has put up the Veteran Public Arts Trail link on the chat for anyone who would like to see it. So it's there. Richard. Would you like to ask it, Richard, yourself?
I don't mean to be flippant, Dr. Kellett, but what did your supervisor think about your attention to detail?
Sorry, say again?
I was wondering what your supervisor thinks about your attention to detail in air quotes.
Well, this supervisor, I was one of them. This supervisor was very happy Susan's other supervisor was Martin Crotty, who is a military historian, and he was going down a somewhat different track to myself. We got along really well, and I hope complemented the way the thesis came out. But I think Susan taught me a bit about attention to detail.
Wonderful. We're all blessed with lots of patience then. Good luck.
I think Bronwyn really encapsulated my kind of personality when she said, dog and a bone early on. If I find something, there are no bits of paper in my thesis draft saying, look into this, and I never did. I kind of covered off absolutely everything.
And Susan, you might like to mention, though, that you have got a couple of pieces of work that have been published in academic journals that people could follow up.
Yeah, so I've provided to GLASS the 2 copies of my published papers. One is on the figures in the window. It's called Love and Truth, the Windows of the Australian War Memorial. The other is called Australia's Army Nurse Locating a Woman as the Centre of Sacrifice in the Hall of Memory, I think, from memory. But if anybody would like a copy of those, I'm pretty sure that the team would be happy to send them out. They are history papers, so they're about 8,000 words each. So they take a bit to get through, but there's lots of pictures and that I've taken, my images and blow-ups, and there's a little bit of the background. For example, the Australian War Memorial appears in the base of one of the windows, a stylised image of the Australian War Memorial, which was very helpful when I was working out, the east, west and the south windows. Waller left lots of really intriguing little tidbits in the windows that we're still unravelling.
Right. I can't see everybody in one hit on my my screen, so I've been going back and forth. But please yell out if anyone would like another comment before I ask. Go, Paul. Go, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a shameless plug, but as a veteran, I volunteer with Mark and VAM, and it'd be lovely to catch up.
I'd love that, yeah.
Especially as there's a connection between the two of us at the lead balloon.
Yeah.
But it'd be great if you came down and we had a chance to say hello.
Yeah, well, we can make that happen. Did you say you're a veteran as well, Paul?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
Real.
right.
Look at that. We're everywhere. We're like Chicken Man.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in hiding, but occasionally we come out.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'd very much like to do that. We can look at teeing something up. I think, did Mark say the next walk's on March next year? I've made a note.
Part of the Festival of Veterans.
Yeah, there's certainly one as part of OVA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
There is a question from Charlotte. Is there a way to access the papers online, Susan?
No, you get the fight. If you try to access them online, you'll be asked by the publisher to pay an exorbitant amount of money for them. So as researchers and authors, we're very happy to give you our papers, copies of our paper, because, you can try, but it does cost money. The other thing is my thesis is available to read at UQ. It's electronically stored, but I think I'm not sure about how you'd go about doing that. Do you know, Bronwyn or Beverly, how you access?
I think you just go to the university and look up thesis.
And then you can see it, can you?
Put in Kellett and it'll come up.
Okay.
And for your papers, sorry, Bronwyn, I was just going to say for the papers you've provided us with, Susan, if anybody wants to just email us, director@glassinc.com.au, and I'll send them out.
Thank you.
And Tanya Johnson says, thank you, Susan, for a wonderful presentation. Look forward to learning more through your research and papers. Are there other works of Napiers and Christians that you researched?
Yes. So half of my thesis is about Napier Waller. So there is one window where, so Bronwyn in your introduction discussed that William Montgomery died while working on a Warriors Chapel at All Saints in Bathurst. Waller helped with the drafting of one of those windows, as did Christian. But the windows, I actually go on, there's actually, sorry, I'm, getting into excited mode here, but there's a series of windows around Melbourne, and I'd love to do a Napier Waller walking tour with people, but there's a series of windows around Melbourne that are actually directly related to the windows of the Hall of Memory. So the two papers I've actually written are supposed to be two of a three-part series. I haven't got around to working on the third part yet, but there's two windows in Melbourne that basically directly relate to the love story between him and Lorna in the windows of the Australian War Memorial. And he basically subverts is just too probably harsh a word, but he does actually play with the imagery and present it in a way that the patrons got what they believed they were asking for. But there are some really, in one set of windows in particular, there's some really strong messages about war and the futility of war. And again, Christian and Lorna both appear are basically represented in one of the windows in one of the schemes. So yes, there are other windows that I've researched as part of my thesis and as on my ongoing research as well.
Some lovely comments in the chat. We're getting close to the end. Nobody else coming up with anything at the moment. Donna, maybe I'll throw to you. Oh, wait on. Tanya's come back. Did Napier ever write about his works? Oh, dear.
A lot of artists leave archives, and a lot of the archives find their way into state or national or gallery archives. Unfortunately, Napier's didn't, and the only research, or that if they exist, we're yet to find them. I hold eternal hope that we will find some of his records, but any work on Waller involves basically going to the churches and the War Memorial and the places where he did windows or other artworks and delving into their archives. So, as I said, I am an optimist, and I live in perpetual hope that we're going to stumble across his archival notes at some stage, but not yet. We haven't found them yet.
There is a story, isn't there, that he burnt a lot of personal records?
Oh, I actually haven't heard that. But I think one of the main reasons is, I feel that one of the main reasons is that, if it had been found out in the 1950s that Lorna, when the windows went in, was his lover rather than, look, the RSL, for one, would have, lost that window would have been pulled out. I can say, if you look at the RSL and its militancy and how important the memory of returned men and sacrifice was, I have no doubt that window would have been lost to us.
Ooh, another new message. I just missed it, but
Tanya said, fascinating, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria.
That's right.
Okay, Donna, maybe I could hand over to you very briefly for the...
Briefly, I've just cut half the things I was going to say out so everybody can go and have their dinner or whatever. Thanks, Bronwyn. Firstly, thank you, Susan. It was wonderful. There's such great stories around the Wallets, and in fact, they are a great story. But thank you for all your work in creating this lecture experience for us, which we all thoroughly enjoyed, and we really appreciate it. And a parcel will be in the mail on its way to you very soon with our love and gratitude. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you in Melbourne. Thanks, Bronwyn, organising yet another great lecture, which you managed to do year after year in amongst producing books and films and all the other things that you do. So thank you.
Don't forget the upcoming podcast.
And the podcast, right, the book which led to the film, which is leading to the podcast. So, yes, you'll hear about those. And Maria, thank you for all your support and technical assistance and attention to detail and making sure that Bronwyn and I don't have to panic about technical things.
My pleasure. It was fascinating. I learned a lot.
Good. And I just want to mention a fascinating exhibition that's currently showing at the Australian Centre for Glass Design, which is our gallery space at 140 High Street, Prahran. Transparent Obscurity shows the work of 4 Melbourne Polytechnic graduates, Scarlett Mellows, Jordan Benson, Ricky Martin and Michael Castledine, who are all very talented glass artists, makers and designers now and into the future. I just want to take, oh no, I won't do it. I was going to read what, I'll put it up on the website, how Scarlett describes the exhibition, but it is well worth a look. So it's open until the 30th of November, Thursday to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And on the 30th of November, there will be an event, which you're all welcome to attend, between 2 and 4 p.m. to come and meet the artists and have a drink with us. Also, just quickly, in early December, we're going to transform the gallery into a lovely Christmas gift shop, encouraging everybody to give the magic of glass for Christmas, and that will include work from our students and our graduates. And then just lastly, I want to mention that in 2025, in February, it will be our 10th anniversary. And Bronwyn and I can't believe 10 years have passed. We think it must at least have been 25. That's how it feels, doesn't it, Bronwyn? Yep. So we're going to have a range of, we'll have 10 special events throughout the year to celebrate the 10 years, including exhibitions. We are also getting a new website finally, which is really exciting. And this is very new news for most people, but we will be delivering a diploma at Melbourne Polytechnic in 2025. We won't be delivering the Cert 4. We've gone to a diploma of visual arts glass, which we're very happy to announce that that's going ahead. So lots of progress being made. And we hope to see you all at other events. And thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, Donna. I will just say thank you, Susan, and also terrific evening. And anyone has any further communication they want to make, do so through Glass Inc., and we'll make sure that Susan hears about it, and let us know about any other glass events that are happening. We like to see ourselves very much at Glass Inc. as a hub, not as a peak body, a hub where we can provide information. Yes, Maria, what did you wish to say? Oh, she's clapping.
I just applauded you all.
So thank you very much for coming this evening. It's great to see you all, and see you next time, I hope.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.